Everyone except the conference room.
Right. Mayor Parker?
Here?
Mr. Jacobs?
Here.
Mr. Strackoff?
Here.
Mr. Martin?
Here.
Mr. Landuse?
Here.
Mr. Stewart?
Here.
Mr. D?
Here.
Ms. Christie?
Here.
And Mr. Stevenson.
Here.
Adequate notice this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Bernardsville News, Bernardsville, the Courier News, Somerville, and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 13, 2016.
Okay, if everyone would join me in the flag salute, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we need to approve the minutes from March 3rd? Has everyone had a chance to review those? Any comments or questions?
Yeah,
Additions?
I've looked at them, they're fine.
Okay, we have the stamp of approval.
Right.
Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from the March 3rd meeting?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? No, okay. Motion passes. Correspondence. It looks like there is a letter here that was sent from Paul Ferraro. Subject, based on this direction from Mayor Parker and Committeeman Jacobs, Frank, Tom, and I have looked at the township's land management ordinance to try to identify areas where there are common difficulties for applicants for permits. So this letter, I think, is available. If anybody needs a copy, we probably have one. The other item is a letter to Bedminster Township Committee from the Bedminster Business Association. So available to if anybody wants to look at it. Any comments on the correspondence?
That's going to be under item 9.
Okay. Resolutions none. Public comments. Are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment for any items not on the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none. Determination of completeness, 0. No ordinances, old business. Okay, new business. Thank you, gentlemen. Zoning ordinance discussion.
Are we going to jump to that?
Does everyone realize that KDC is not on the agenda, and therefore
That's a good point.
they
For all you
public
folks,
comment?
if anybody's here for KDC, KDC has withdrawn the application. Mr. Sasso, do you have anything to say?
Absolutely, quite a bit.
Okay.
Well,
I don't know.
Tom,
The mayor and the council members should recuse and
just let us know when
leave the room.
Board of Adjustment matter.
Yep.
Well, maybe we should do this.
No, we should
No?
do this.
Okay.
George.
Do
Okay.
this
Then all
first.
these people can
Right.
go.
Or stay if you want.
Welcome, Mr. Sasso.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, 2 years and 14 meetings later, there has been a request first for a suspension of KDC's application, and then that was changed by a subsequent letter making it clear that they were not going forward with the application. I have, and I previously had objected to really what was an abuse of this board by Thomas Lynch and KDC in not proceeding in good faith with the application. But at this point in time, it's clear from the case law that I've provided that their withdrawal for this board is subject to the discretion of the board. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's just for the people of Bedminster, including my client, who spent what is clearly well into the six figures. I can tell you in talking to Michelle, between all the experts that have been hired, that were probably closer to $200,000 in expenses injecting to this application, which we have always maintained had no merit whatsoever. According to the case law, I submitted a case to the board in advance so everyone would have an opportunity to read it. The board has great discretion. You can, and it's my first request, dismiss KDC's application with prejudice. It would be like me going to the court and entertaining a jury for 2.5 weeks. And when my case did not look good, say, oh, by the way, I'm withdrawing without prejudice. And having the legal ability the following morning, after taking all the court/board's time and the defense spending all the money they spent, meaning that the attorney could then, the plaintiff, file the complaint again the next day. And the situation that we are in, and this board's in, 2 years of meetings, I'm telling you, it's close to $200,000 between both sides. And get a one-page letter saying we're withdrawing. But that's not what the case law says. The case law says, you know, when you sit in a zoning board, you're more like it's a quasi-judicial function. They're hearing witnesses, and there are certain principles that apply from the court rules to what you are doing. In cases like this, where people have applied and the objectors have been prejudiced and spent a lot of money in opposing the application, the discretion isn't for the applicant whose case has gone downhill to just say, oh, I'm going further at this point, and then file again on May 1. Because that's what we're facing here. And I need the board to understand that that's what we're facing. As I get in my car and I drive back home, what tell the Forbes? That KDC can refile May 1 because it was not with prejudice? That's what I have to tell him. I have to tell him that after he spent over $100,000. 2 engineers, you'll remember, I had John Chadwick, the planner. KDC was coming forth and saying, we're going forward. We have a right to rely on that. Now we're going to tell him, no, they can file again next month. Because without prejudice and with prejudice means a lot, a great deal. So if you don't have that opportunity the first time and your case falls apart, which is what happened to them, do you get another bite at the apple? Do you think that the people in here who had all those charity events to raise money, pay for Ms. Donato and her experts, you know, should go home tonight wondering if KDC has the legal right to apply again on May 1? Can sit here and say that's fair? Because that's what this Sansone case says. Fair supplies. That it's within your authority as a board to weigh what the prejudices are, the objectors, and the expenses that we've incurred. It specifically says that. In that case, they went all the way through to deliberation. And KDC, well, only 2 years later, came to the same conclusion that with what has taken place so far, we're not going anywhere. The board won't approve it. But again, if we don't do it with prejudice, and a dismissal with prejudice, they can refile. The case also stands for a middle ground. My first preference would be a dismissal with prejudice, to be fair. the middle ground that they suggest, that this board also has the right to accept the dismissal. Remember, it's not up to them saying, I'm not showing up anymore. Withdraw. Nothing happened, and we'll file again. It's the board's decision. But the middle ground that they say, at the very least, in the middle, you can require in the resolution that if KDC comes back, that a condition for bringing the action again, they must pay the council fees and costs of the objectors. That's the middle ground. Arguing with prejudice, but it's the middle ground. And that's what this case says. Lastly, I would argue to the board, and Michelle will touch on this subject also, that a record that's been created here should apply to any renewal, if I can use the opposite of Mr. Carter in English's letter that said we suspend, if they come back forward with this application, that the record that we created over 2 years should also apply to that application. Otherwise, again, it's like 2 bites at the apple. Things don't look good, I'm going to withdraw after 2 years and then come forward. The law is very clear. This is the only case I could find, by the way. And the only thing that's different is that they actually, the board deliberated. It was at that time that the board would not allow the applicant to withdraw. But it's the only fair thing here. Can you imagine if this application gets filed again on May 1? These people have to go back out and raise money, and the board has to go through 2 years of hearings. I mean, they were done with their application. And, you know, the planner had completed his testimony. They had 2 years worth of meetings, 14 full meetings. By the way, in Sansone, they also noted that at these meetings, they were the only application on, and that we heard, or that board heard, everything that the applicant had to offer. That's true here. That's true here. The easy way out for the board is say, forget about it. We're not going to do anything. An applicant has the right to withdraw at any time. Number one, I would respectfully argue that's not the law. And two, I ask you to look inside your core. Does that sound like it's right? Does it sound fair? Does it sound just? They could spend all this money and 2 years of this board's time, and that they can refile tomorrow morning. It's not right. I've applied what I think is the applicable law, which makes it clear that some of these principles that apply to our courts also apply to you as a board. So I'd ask that you consider denying it with prejudice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sasso. Mr. Nada, would you like to say a few words before we...
Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the board. Before we start, I really do want to thank this board. It has been an incredible attention. A sense of fairness permeated every meeting. You allowed full disclosure through the process of cross-examination. Ended up very effectively revealing the site was not the right site, that the ordinance was strong, that your master plan was strong, that you had very comprehensive planning that made it virtually impossible for this applicant to satisfy the negative criteria that were necessary in this matter. So they withdrew, and I think it was with wisdom that they did so. I join 100% in the comments made by Mr. Sasso with respect to the discretion that this board has as established by case law and by court rules to do something to really protect the investment of this community, of your residents, in this application. And I agree with his proposals that there be a dismissal with prejudice, and alternatively, if not, this board consider imposing some very important conditions to protect the township and to protect its residents. At the very least, record established in these proceedings really revealed a number of defects: stormwater management problems, soil problems, visibility problems, detriment to the zone plan, any number of issues that were really exposed through what is called the greatest engine of truth, cross-examination. And that record should follow this piece of property. If someone comes back to you, be it KDC or another solar operator, and they want to do a solar facility, a utility scale or not, on this property, that record should follow this property. That's the very, very least that we should do. I'd also, like to say that I don't think that the applicant not have really interpreted anything from what this board said or did. You just allowed a full and fair hearing. And they were faced with facts that they could not confront. And thanks to your comprehensive planning, it's a real tribute to this township that you were the bravest ones to go up there first to defend large lot zoning in the Kirby decision, a case where many land use practitioners debated whether or not the courts would sustain that right. But you were very fortunate to have a planner in Frank Banish that is absolutely superb at assuring these legitimate governmental objectives are satisfied. Very, very thoroughly done. So I don't think that anything happened other than KDC finally came to realize this was just a terrible application. So if they walk away from it with consequence, not without consequence. And you have the law that has been presented to you, Mr. Sasso, is very, very clear on that, and it's not easily distinguishable because it was a little slightly further in the process than we currently have. I ask that this record be forever attached to this property. Then we will have achieved something that will benefit everyone in the future. I'd also like to ask that the board require the site be restored. I've been told that as a result of the numerous efforts to find a suitable location for the panels in conjunction with the stormwater management plan, that there are piles of shale just throughout the site. And I think the site should be restored, and not just left like that. Other than that, I really want to say that I thank this board immensely for its dedication. I thank your professionals for their careful attention to this entire application, for the reports that really made it more able for us to flesh out all the benefits of your rural resource conservation zone. And we hope that in the future, I'm quite convinced in the future that this board will continue, because that is your long-term plan and you're rewarded for it. I thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Nato. Mr. Collins, I have a couple questions for you.
Mr. Chairman, just let's ask Claire to recuse. He was recused on the whole case, and he probably, or if you would step down from the dais, that'd be good. All right, Mr. Chairman, let's just make sure that there are no other persons wanting to address the board on the KDC withdrawal of their application.
Okay, are there any members of the public that would like to come forward and address the board? Mr. Kibler? Hi, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bill Kibler, Raritan Headwaters Association. Our offices are 2121 Larger Cross Road in Bedminster. I had three things that I wanted to address, I hope, briefly with the board tonight. First thing, and I think the most important thing, is I'd like to encourage you to dismiss this application with prejudice. You've already heard from the two attorneys, so I won't go over that again, but KC had the opportunity to present their entire case before the board. The process has been more than fair to KDC. I think you all have done a fantastic job with them. And on the other side of the balance sheet, you've got the objectors who had to deal with the expenses and the time and the effort of preparation, and had barely had an opportunity to even get started on their case. I think, in my personal opinion, obviously, the fairness is pretty clearly on the side of the objectors here, and that you would be well within your rights to dismiss this with prejudice. That was the first thing. The second thing I just wanted to address briefly is why I'm here. You've probably seen me sitting in most of these meetings. I get a lot of questions from my colleagues in the environmental community why a watershed association was helping fight solar installation, which is the sort of thing that normally we would support. The short answer is that we support communities that have good planning, and Bedminster, your planning, is good planning. Raritan Headwater Association, which was previously the Upper Raritan Watershed Association, worked with you when you were putting your master plan together. We don't hesitate to tell a community when we think their planning needs work, and I think we also have an obligation to tell those communities that are doing good planning that they are doing good work. And I think if we're going to fight against bad planning, we also have an obligation to help defend good planning, which is what I see in Bedminster. I hold up Bedminster. We have 38 communities, 38 towns, our municipalities, and our watershed, and I hold up Bedminster as an example of good planning and a good master plan and how this process can work. So I congratulate you for that, and I want to thank the board for defending your planning and your master plan. I want to thank the people of Bedminster who came out to defend their master plan, their planning here in their community. And the last thing I wanted to do was just thank the Land Use Board itself. I think with 38 communities in my watershed, I get to attend a lot of planning board and land use board hearings. I wouldn't really wish that on anyone, but enough of them in just the last couple of years. The board has been thoughtful, fair, and incredibly patient. Above and beyond the call of duty. And I also wanted to thank your professionals. Working with a lot of communities, I can tell you that you're very fortunate to have the board secretary and the engineer and the attorney and the planner that you do. You've got excellent professionals, and I thank them for their professionalism, if you will, in this matter. That was all I wanted to address. Thank you very much, and again, I would encourage you to dismiss the application with prejudice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kibler. Are there any other citizens that would like to come forward?
So happy to be here tonight. Michelle Smith. I live on Washington Valley Road in Baskin Ridge, New Jersey. In Bedminster, half in Porter. I wanted to ask also and to reiterate that dismissing this with prejudice is validating all the citizens, all the people who have come out here, even come out to meetings when KDC canceled at the last minute. This is our home. This is your home. Our homes are supposed to be a place where we feel safe, where we could relax, where we could enjoy life. And those of us who moved into this area, who weren't lucky enough to be born and raised here, treasure that. We value that. But mostly with dismissing it with prejudice really does say, guess what? It's not going to happen in our backyard. Their capricious wanton behavior when people are up here talking it really lends it to the fact that they are not good neighbors. It's up to us, it's up to you to really search, is this the kind of people we want in our neighborhood who would take property, make it to a solar panel plant, send it to another town which the company is mostly leaving. So I ask you to please search. Please be our neighbors. Please let us live in peace here. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come up and come? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Jeff Bolash, 150 Somerset Terrace. I wasn't going to say anything, but first I want to thank all of you people. The job that you do is just, it's an amazing job, and how the hell do you do it? Now, you're here every day, or every meeting. This may be my fourth or fifth one. There's other people out here that are here every meeting that you have. But what Richard Sasso and what Michelle said all holds true. But I'm thinking of this guy who has property adjacent to the, I'm not going to call it the Cree Farm, the Stevenson Farm. Garvin, I know his name. But no, he's licking his lips. He's going like this because he owns a lot of property there too. And if you allow 34,000 solar panels to go on the Stevenson Farm, he's going to want solar panels on his farm as well. That's all I wanted to say. So you have to think of that too. It's the gateway to Somerset County, the gateway to Bridgewater or Bedminster, right there. Country Club Road, it's right there. So you have to think of that also. The domino effect. One goes down, others will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come. Billy in the back first.
This is a Bedminster wannabe. My name's Diane Mine. I live in Bridgewater, and I have attended some meetings. But I just, Mine, I-N-E.
Thank you.
I have attended some meetings, and it does impact my property as well. But I'm feel certain that you all are aware of the decisions that the Bridgewater Township has made regarding the property that is over at the Santa Fe old AT&T site, and that they have permitted multi-use variances so that there will be a hotel there could be malls. They want to put in 400 families for housing, and there's a lot of changes going on that property. And my concern, if you do not dismiss this with prejudice, is that other people will come in and say, hey, why not? Let's not make our property look poor because the panels are there. Let's put it over in Bedminster and have the same issue come up again. So again, I thank you for your efforts. I am encouraging you to, as everyone else, to dismiss this, but with prejudice, so that they can't come back again and take a look at that new land that's up for grabs and have other companies come in and go through the same that you've just gone through. Again, thank you for allowing me to speak at meetings.
Thank you.
Bob Graven, Graven. Bolin just made a reference that I'm licking my chops. Do you see me licking my chops? I've attended these meetings for 30 years. That's a long time. I haven't just shown up for the last 4 or 5. That was quite an insult. And it's a derivative of my position and my property. I have property similar to the Forbes property. I have a lot in it. On a relative basis, compared to the Forbes family or the other larger landowners, there's a much greater percentage. My family. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Graven. Is there anyone else that would like to come up and make any comments? Seeing none, Ms. Collins, I have a couple questions for you. The first question is, in your memory, has there ever been an application in town that's been dismissed with prejudice?
Not that I remember, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Okay, thank you. You heard the counsel from the objectors, everyone here, and Mr. Collins. What would the ramifications to the township be if, in fact, a determination was made by the board dismissed with prejudice, Mr. Collins, if any?
Let's first go over what the status is, just so we are clear on the record.
Thank you.
Although the first letter from Mr. Hall was a letter requesting a suspension of an application, he received an objection to that from Mr. Sasso. Mr. Sasso sort of described orally tonight. I believe he also spoke with Donato. Mr. Hall spoke with Mr. Donato. And then Mr. Hall sent a letter confirming without any equivocation that the applicant was withdrawing their application, not seeking to suspend their application. The letter was addressed to the board and delivered by email before the last meeting. So technically the case ended with that letter. The public hearing is not on tonight, it's over. This is not a public hearing, it is not a continuation of a public hearing. It's a public meeting. So, nonetheless, in spite of that withdrawal, Mr. Sasso and Ms. Donato have appeared here tonight, and these people have appeared and asked you to take some action on a withdrawn application. First of all, you not have to take any action. That's up to the board whether you want to take any action. There's some discretion on behalf of the board. But acknowledged by Mr. Sasso, the letter he cites is a different kind of case in which the case was presented, the objectors appeared or presented their case or whatever, and the entire case was over, not in the middle of the case when the board was deliberating, that the issue came up whether to dismiss with or without prejudice. Here, you're not even here yet, the objector's case. You heard cross-examination. You didn't get to hear from the public. Not that that's totally controlling, but it's very important because to reach any conclusion on the substance, you haven't heard the substance of this entire case yet. You've heard only the applicant's primary presentation, not the full case. So that's a little different, factually quite different than the Sansone case cited by Mr. Sasso. On the other hand, the fact that the case withdrawn does not mean that the record could not be used in the future by the board or by the applicant or by the objectors in a future case if there ever was one. Actually, I think that subject would be determined at the time of any future application, not now. But I put on the record that I'd certainly be open to the board taking a look at any future application and considering that record in making any future determinations on any future application that were get filed. The light of a filing seems very low, though. I don't think this is as likely as the objectors are submitting to you, because people don't just cavalierly withdraw their applications very often, especially the magnitude that we're talking about. So my instincts would be to recommend to you that you just accept the withdrawal.
And if in fact...
Don't take any action. Don't adopt a resolution. Don't dismiss with prejudice. Don't dismiss without prejudice.
And as far as attaching the record to a future...
It may not. That may be something you decide, if it's 10 years from now, frankly, it might be too dated. Actually, we had arguments from Mr. Sasso that it was already too dated, which I respect but don't necessarily agree with. But it's really an issue for a future case.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Collins. For the folks on the board that did hear the case, do you have any comments?
But let me just warn the board, we did not reach the end of the case. Let's not make any findings on the substance of the case or on the substance of the application. Just on the procedure, such as whether to dismiss,
Right.
not dismiss, whether to dismiss with prejudice.
Now, even,
1 second.
so even if we were to dismiss with prejudice,
I'll tell you what that
some
means.
other
Let me tell you what that really means. What that really means, and something of a less important factor in land use law than it is in jury trials or civil trials. Why I say that? Because the res judicata principles that apply to land use applications mean that if something is denied with prejudice, that exact application or an application substantially similar to it cannot be made to the board and will be barred by the doctrine of res judicata. The case law also says if a substantial change is made in an application that has been denied with prejudice, that it can be filed with the board and has to be heard by the board. So the principles of res judicata as to a use variance application and a site plan application are not the exact equivalent of a jury trial or a civil trial. So this court rules do not directly apply. So basically, there's no requirement that the board determine whether something may or may not be withdrawn. That's a judicial requirement, but that is not necessarily a board requirement, and it isn't necessarily a requirement of the municipal land use law. And a case cited by Mr. Sasso does not say that, but he's not actually arguing that either. The point I would make is the application could be filed even if it was dismissed with prejudice.
That was what I was going to ask.
As long as they made a substantial change. And substantial change in that field is fairly minor, so I think we better be careful about the meaningfulness of dismissal with prejudice.
For example, if a different company came to do
That might be an issue, but one of the great benefits of saying what I'm recommending to you that just take no action is that a withdrawal was made. That withdrawal is stated in a letter. The meaningfulness of that withdrawal is what the letter says. What happens in the future will be determined by the board in whether a future application is ever made. And if such an application is made by the same or a similar applicant for the same property, the board may be able to determine at that time to what extent is the withdrawal negative to the applicant's position, to what extent should the prior record be considered by the board. And, a good way to look at that is, let's say it's 5 years from now. That's stale. That's too old a record. Maybe it'll be redone by everyone. Or if it's sooner than that, maybe it isn't stale, and the board will make that call. That will be an issue in that case, if there is one. So it isn't as much harm as it might be a benefit to both the applicant, the public, the objectors, and the board to let that be decided if and when a future application is made. So I think that's fair, but I'll defer to the board that you do have discretion on the subject. You could perhaps make this motion to dismiss with prejudice. You could perhaps make a motion to dismiss without prejudice. And I guess you could possibly say you dismiss it without prejudice, but you require that you will consider the record as part of a record in a future application if one is made. Not too comfortable about the concept of requiring the payment of the objector's costs, because although that's implied in the decision, there is no statutory or case law or rule authority that allows a board to enforce fees by one party against the other, and it's not very likely that it would be successfully enforced.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Yes, Lou.
I have two questions for Tom. The first is that, correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you need to explain it a little bit further for me. If KC were to come back in a month or two and put in a new application, the board at that time decide whether or not we want to hear that application, or if that record was going to follow from the previous application?
Satisfied that you could do that if you were hearing and seeing the same type of application, even if it wasn't necessarily the exact same parties, because a record was made about that property, and in your discretion to determine what you want to include in your records. It is public record. It is a transcript. It was sworn testimony by the applicant and that applicant's witnesses, and by the objector's attorneys presenting a cross-examination of the witnesses. So an intact record. It may be something that would be relevant, and the board must so find at that time when it sees that application. So if it's 1 month from now, that's less stale than if it's 10 years from now. And I think that matters. I think it should be the future board that decides to what extent a record is going to be used. And that would be at the time when there is a public hearing, and any parties that agree with that or disagree with that could express their objections and concerns to the board about that. So, in other words, it's not foreclosed by you just accepting a withdrawal.
So by inaction,
Inaction is actually...
it doesn't negate the possibility of doing that in the future.
That's correct.
Okay.
Tom, I do have another question, a little bit of a follow-up. If we were to take the more extreme position that Mr. Sasso illustrated, our responsibilities to the township as a whole, not necessarily to one area or one neighborhood, what would be the consequences to the township if we were to take, or are there any consequences, potential consequences to the township if we were to take a strong stand as that?
Yeah, there are consequences, and that probably increases the likelihood of a challenge to the board's dismissal. And that would result in significant cost to the municipality in a manner that wouldn't necessarily benefit anyone in any great way. So. But you make decisions not so much based, as I've always advised you, you don't make your decisions based upon the fact that somebody might sue you. Don't worry about that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Just, Tom, are you saying with respect to the middle ground that was described by Mr. Sasso, that you don't believe that there's the authority for that?
I don't, yes, I agree that the case mentions the potential that a board could perhaps say that fees shall be imposed on the reinstatement of the case, but that was a case in which the case reached the full conclusion of the case, and the substance of the decision could have been made. I have no authority in any other case law or in the municipal land use law for the position of fees by the board upon one party for the other person's costs and fees. But my point about that as well is that if that was imposed as a condition, I have concerns that it would not be enforceable. In other words, it would not be you couldn't collect those fees, you couldn't use our order to force someone to pay the fees. So.
Thank you, Doug. I'm inclined to follow the advice of our counsel and accept the withdrawal from the applicant. I think it's important that in the future, if the need arises, we have the record and we can use it then. I think the counsel for the objectors and everyone in the audience, I think you got your answer. They withdrew. And you won. So that's how I feel about it. So to move ahead, Tom,
Is there anyone who want to make any kind of motion? I don't recommend one, but if you want to, you could, someone wanted to make a motion to dismiss with prejudice or without prejudice, you could, but
Is there anyone on the board that wants to make that motion? Okay.
so you have no desire by the board to make an action. The matter is deemed withdrawn. The case was withdrawn last on the Thursday, last Thursday, and it is over.
Okay, thank you. So next I... Sorry?
Case over, sir.
It's over. If I just may say one thing, sir, if anyone can come anytime with an application, they could change it. That's the free country we live in. So at any time, no matter what we do up here, someone can come and say, we want to do this, and we have to hear it. So that's the bottom line. So. Thank you very much. Okay. New business, so where are we now? Old
Paragraph
business?
the mayor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Zoning ordinance.
Planning board is-
Yeah, number 9, okay.
And Claire, too, Trina.
Hey, you want to take a 5-minute break? Sounds good. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
Frank? Oh,
Thank you, Ken.
all right. So, this is the kind of thing, I think what Paul, this is the chart.
Yeah, announce that.
Congratulations.
George said that. Congratulations. Anybody can come here, anytime.
You're dreaming.
You bring up anything, and we got to deal with it, right?
Go ahead and say.
And then the dealing with it, we can refer back to this stuff. But I thought you did a very nice summary there, George.
I talked to you.
Well done. Well done,
I
sir.
told him to call you.
I vote for you for president.
You should say thank you. You called him, because I told you to. And I told him he should speak with you,
So we did what we do best.
and you were successful.
Nothing. Excellent. Government is functioning at its
No,
finest.
well, rarely did. Oh, no, you did, I mean, that's not the transparency issue.
Steve, whatever happened to that great idea of the
Microphones are on. Next item on the agenda is new business, zoning ordinance discussion. I believe the first letter was written by Paul Ferraro. He's not here tonight, but certainly we can start the discussion. Larry or Mayor Parker, do you want to kind of lead off? And
Yes, I can at least tell you where this originates from and has originated. You've got two letters in front of you. One comes from the Business Association. And the Business Association, if you look at the date of the letter, well, do we have the date on the letter? It's from a little bit, it's from a while ago. Actually, might be from the previous summer, because I think Carolyn Freeman's name is on it. So, one of the issues we have is, and I've mentioned it before, is that our business corridor, the 206 business corridor, is not performing. And, we just wrapped the township's budget the other night. We're looking at maybe a 1.24% increase for the municipality. I was at the budget hearing last night for the school, and they're going to be lucky to make it to that. They even talked about going before the voters, which they don't want to do. So there's lots of pressures, and even if we, the municipality, the county, and the school, were able to freeze our budget spending to zero, the residents in this town are looking at 5 to 7 to 10% increases in their property tax. And the reason being is because the commercial ratables, empty business space in town, is dropping the piece of the pie that the businesses pay. And so as much as we can tighten our budgets, every resident's property taxes are going to go up much more than the 2% that has been imposed upon us. That's one piece of the pie. The other piece of the pie is we've got some anecdotal evidence, and I'm sure some of you talked to some of your friends and neighbors. We've got folks that are interested in putting money into their own homes in town. They might want to put a pool or a deck on, but the feedback we get is, I don't want to come before that land use board. It's going to cost me $7,000 in legal and engineering fees before I even get the question asked. Now, I try to tell them we have a much kinder and gentler land use board than you might have heard in years past. They're nice people. Don't worry about them so much. But it's not really about the folks at dais and how we conduct ourselves. It is about our code and the way our code has been written over the years, that it has been constrained to the point where basic logical consents changes always turn into variances. And so it's put a chill in some of the residents. And I know of several people that have put their house up for sale, and where are you going to move to? Move to Bernardsville. Move to Bernards Township. Move to Duxbury. Really? You're leaving Bedminster to go down the road? Well, yeah, I want to put a pool in my backyard, but I don't want to go through this hassle. Really? That's it? So we have people that are unwilling and interested in investing in their own property in our town because of issues with some of our zoning code. So taking the input from the Business Association, and I've had a conversation with Mr. Ferraro and all Mr. Collins and some other folks to say, let's kind of scratch our head and take a look at our zoning, not throw it out, not completely change the character of Bedminster, but are there tweaks we can make that keep the character of the town, but allow for people to improve their home somewhat and improve their business somewhat so that we keep them in town. And that is the impetus behind the correspondence that you see in front of it. Now, some of this stuff may look very common sense. Some may not look like something you want to do, but I think we do owe it to the residents and the businesses in town to have a discussion on it. That's
Yeah, and I'll just add to what the mayor said, is the extent that the current zoning requirements are preventing investment in Bedminster building product, whether it's houses or whether it's businesses. The fact that folks are looking to go elsewhere because they can get a pool, or they have that bathroom that they want. When we had discussions with Paul and with Frank and with Tom about what's coming before the board, what the variances we're seeing, but there's another level. It's the applications we're not seeing because folks aren't coming forward with application. There's grousing about, I want to get that pool in. I got a $1 million house without a pool. How can I sell a $1 million house without a pool down the road? Because every $1 million house in Bernardsville or Bernards Township or Tewksbury or Chester has a pool. I'm at a disadvantage. I better get out now. And as the mayor said, we're not looking to compromise the R10 or the R1 or R2 zones. It's really helping the homeowners and the business owners to get them back into housing product that they want to have and keep in Bedminster, and frankly, that we want to see here in Bedminster. We want to see people investing in their homes and feeling comfortable about making those improvements rather than not. So that really was the genesis of the discussion that we had with Frank, and one was, just quick, Frank, if you could just change a 0.05 to a 0.06, does that get some of these folks around so that they can get their bathroom addition, or they can get their deck, or they could get their pool? We're not looking to do a rewrite. We just want to hit some of the low-hanging fruit that allows folks to feel comfortable investing in Bedminster. So,
Thank you. Why don't you, let's let Frank go. It's your insight.
Let Frank go.
I got my jacket ready.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I think in his role as the zoning officer, Paul has seen exactly what Larry's talked about, the people that really are discouraged even by the thought of this stuff, what they might get involved in. But I think when we talk about what change is the right change to make, some of the requirements that are imposed have been there for a reason that we have to double check before let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you look at the 3% FAR, that's the R10 district, which before we rezoned, used to be called the R3% district. And the R3% district was a relatively clever approach that Bedminster came up to of creating a zoning standard that didn't necessarily have a lot size associated with it. And it happened before the hills and before all of the challenge to your zoning ordinance. But the 3% standard was felt to be a reasonable amount of development on the land. Now, in those days, you really could get pretty close to a 3-acre lot if you wanted. That's the reason we did the downzoning in the first place. So the question you have to ask yourself, and Paul's put the numbers right in there, if a 10-acre lot is allowed 13,000 square feet of coverage, and if the basement counts, well, the garage doesn't count. It's the only thing that doesn't count. A 4-foot or greater overhang on the roof counts. Every floor of every building that is potentially habitable or has headroom counts as a floor. So floor area is the total of all those floors added up together. I think his point was, so on a 10-acre lot, if you had a basement that was 4,356 square feet that held up 2 floors of the same size, so you'd have a 9,000 square foot house, which in some towns is very big. In other towns, it's par for the course. You'd have used up all the floor area that you were allowed on that 10-acre lot, and you would not be able to have a barn or any other outbuilding, or you basically that would be the commitment you made. So if you were going to look at making a change there, you'd probably want to look at it as a measure of by degrees. Okay, so for instance, if you went to 4%, for the sake of argument, that would go up to 17,000 square feet. If you went to 5%, it would go up to almost 22,000 square feet. At some point in here, you still like FAR as a control. You're going to think, okay, we've made room for somebody to have what you might reasonably put on a 10-acre lot, and we don't want to give them carte blanche to put anything they want short of covering the coverage limit. That's probably a longer conversation than we're going to have right now. I think the real question is, FAR is a an excellent tool for regulating non-residential use. It turns out to be very infrequently used for residential use because of some of these complications and the fact that any variation from it is a use variance. So you've elevated, so you've basically said, if you're going to go over 13,000 square feet, that offends us so badly that you've got to meet the highest standard of proof there is for a variance.
And Frank,
For a 10-acre lot.
right. In the 10 acre
Yes,
zone, in the R10
yes.
zone, but let's also remember how many times we've had applicants come before us and we've had to say, you're going to promise us, right, that you're not going to finish out the attic. You're going to promise us you're not going to finish out the basement.
Just finished,
Because if they finish it,
Right.
then they'd be bumping up.
Inevitable
going-
floor area.
Passing the FAR.
But then we've had the opposite, where someone comes and says, I had this house and so on, and I want to finish the basement, and you can't really see from outside that anything has happened, and we've approved it.
Right, we've approved it,
Yeah.
but the fact that required them coming here?
Right. Is it-
well, and
Right,
and it
so-
wasn't the basement that caused the problem. If you excluded basements and
Yeah.
below-grade spaces, would that mean you would say that they don't count for purposes of how many, what floor area ratio square feet you're getting? It's not uncommon either. And maybe that would be all the fix that's needed, but
But Frank, I mean, as you just said, if FAR is a good tool for controlling non-residential, is lot coverage in that R10 a better mechanism than FAR?
FAR, I think, was chosen because there was a real sense that coverage by itself would allow dramatically more building area on a lot. So they wanted some other tool that was going to say that despite the fact that we might allow you to cover 30% of the lot, your buildings are not going to cover anything like 30% of the lot. But building coverage is a standard that's used regularly in residential zones. So you,
If the issue, and I was not on the planning board, so I don't know what the intent was. If the intent was to use that as some sort of anti-McMansion, well, I guess the intention was anti-McMansion, but, looking at some of the larger Bedminster properties, 10, 20 acres.
well, 10 acres.
Those are properties where,
If you can't have a mansion, not a McMansion, but a mansion, the western part of Bedminster, where in the world should you be allowed to have a mansion? I mean,
You're right.
let's be
You
frank.
can. What happens is, because it's a floor area ratio of the footage of the building to the total square footage of the land.
You just need more land.
If you need more land, if you have a big lot, you can have this, much bigger house than you would ever even want to build, actually. So it's sort of, is this really a problem type of issue? And I say to you, maybe you don't really mind it on the 10-acre lot, or the 6-acre lot, or the 5-acre lot that happens to pre-exist in the R10. That's one thing that, and if you remember, a lot of the ones where you've had people come in, it's been an undersized lot and a knockdown rebuild of an older house. So, and scale does matter. Scale of the house relative to the lot, relative to the neighbors, does matter on the undersized lots in the R10.
Oh, yeah. I got 2 lots on my street in the R10, but they're all 5-acre lots on my street, so they were zoned in nonconformity, and they've been derelict for 10 years, and they can't sell.
There's that, but they might be able to get, we have a grandfather clause that lets people build on an undersized lot too. So that might be septic, that might be some.
Well, yeah.
But.
Nothing in Bedminster Parks. We knew that.
Septic makes things really hard, but, anyway, we could look at this, and we could eliminate, if you decide to, you could, by board, recommend to the council committee to remove the floor area ratio in the R10. It's the only zone, and we think that you have the floor area ratio for a residential zone. You could also modify it to increase the amount, or you could just modify it to define what you count in the floor area ratio and exclude the basements and the porches and or some semblance of that.
So, but, you know, it's really it's sort of where do you want to go with it? Where would you, on this subject? And maybe break them into parts. Don't try to decide this one without talking about the other ones. And Frank, really, I think the key area where we're seeing maybe is what Larry talked about pools and really additions to existing homes.
Coverage and setbacks typically.
Non-R10. Because that's,
I'd like to say a few things. First, in regard to this application, or this discussion we're talking right now, I really do think that a homeowner who's already a taxpayer in town should have some leeway and not have to have sort of the same level of consequence and restrictions that a corporate developer might have or that a business owner might have. So if you're applying FAR to the 10-acre zone, and maybe that's still a good metric, maybe we just need to make it 4% coverage or 5% or some number. So we just tweak it without destroying the whole concept of the idea of controlling lot coverage. And I think that's kind of where Steve was saying right from the beginning.
Yeah, I don't think the goal is to throw out our standards, but see where a little bumping in one direction or the other might help.
Because, you know,
now remember the floor area ratio is one standard.
Right.
And that's really trying to regulate, it's hard to envision this, but it's really trying to regulate the sort of the three-dimensional appearance of the size of the structure relative to the land. That's floor area ratio. We only do it in the R10 and in business zones. Coverage, different concept, is that just two-dimensional.
Right.
The amount of impervious relative to the total tract of the land, and we have that too in the R10, and I think it's 5%, right, Frank? Something like that. It's a very modest percent. So 5% coverage for buildings and for tennis courts and for impervious surfaces, including patios and things like that. So that you get some variances for that. Not too many, because 5% of a 10-acre lot is a pretty good number. And then the 20-acre lot, it's a huge number. And so they're two different things.
Right.
And probably the one that strikes you the most maybe is the floor area ratio, and that's what Paul brought up, because he gets to see that, you know, it does become a problem when you have to count the barn. You know, if somebody has a really big horse barn, that counts. But we want to have a nice horse barn. So do we really care about counting the horse barn in floor area ratio, or do we see people ought to have nice big barns in the R10?
You can also make some change to the definition of floor area ratio, I would think.
That's
And make
what Paul's saying, right?
make some exemptions for things that we think are more in keeping with the character of the town.
And certainly encouraging the agricultural and equestrian activities in Bedminster comes with it the ability for folks who are equestrian inclined to put the barns in it, and the paddocks, and anything else that goes with that. Build a nice house on a place that already has a nice barn. You know, that might be the whole idea. So maybe barns are different than for floor ratio than houses.
And basements, too.
And maybe basements are, but what if it's exposed basement? Do you care if it's bull in the back?
But I'd like to bring up one more thing. And what happens is we have this building envelope. It has many factors to it. One factor would be floor area ratio. Another factor would be lot coverage. Another factor might be the side yard and front yard setbacks. Another factor might be net habitable floor area, the habitable living space. And you start to put them overlay each other, the building envelope starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think this discussion is very complex, and really we almost need like a committee of sorts to sit down and hash this out with maybe Paul and Tom or Frank and say, you know, every zone has its different issues, and when you start putting the overlay of all these factors into it, it gets to be a smaller and smaller building lot, creating more potential hardship for residents. Because now someone might be over the floor area, maybe over the lot coverage, and into someone's setback situation, so I think it's a lot more complicated. I'm sure Frank can validate just making one change.
But I think also one of the things that I think Paul talked about in here was setbacks, and we have two measures on setbacks. You have the hard number, how many feet, and you have a percentage. And both there for good reason, but you see how sometimes if you have an odd-shaped lot, then the percentage can be a real bugaboo. And, is that something that needs to be tweaked?
Setbacks become a bugaboo with odd-shaped lots, flag lots, and stuff like that. My point is, I think maybe we need a subcommittee of sorts to sit down in a room and kind of work through each zone and the experts in the room to decide, you really can't do this because when you change this, it affects that, and that affects the next thing, and we can't just change one without looking at all.
Well, we asked Paul to put this together, and we also spoke to Frank as well. This obviously is just, we're introducing the topic, and, if Mayor and Chair and Vice Chair were here, think that subcommittee is the way to go, then I think you're right. I think this is not a one meeting and
This is not a baked solution. This is here we have a problem and there's some issues outlined in here.
Right. I also think we don't want to turn this into a major project because with a meeting or two of a subcommittee, we ought to be able to get this knocked. This is not like a major master plan change or anything.
Right, and you and Paul have already done a good amount of
I think
homework
we
on
could give you a red line version that the subcommittee could start with, where we'd say, here's what we think you would change, which is the next step we would go to after the conversation we're having tonight. So that there would be some, one of the things that came up when we made some revisions years ago when Dennis Udasco was a member of the board, he's another licensed planner who lives in town, involved averaging the setback for houses, so that if you had a house on either side of you that were different setbacks from the road, you would end up with a unified setback that everybody's supposed to stick to that might put you in somebody's backyard because their house was very close to the street. The theory was that you would kind of accommodate yourself by averaging two setbacks if one was back further. I think what Paul has found is that if you just tell people it's 25-foot front yard, everybody likes hearing that. As soon as you tell them it's average, you got to go out and measure things, and there's a survey maybe involved. It's a lot more complicated than knowing that that's a zone that's always had a 5-foot whatever rear yard. So those are things we can easily adjust, and I don't think that we're throwing out any babies with the bath there. I do think on each of the points he's raised, we have a pretty good idea because he's seen so much of this, of what would fix it. And if we come back with your existing standard and we'll cross out and change what we think should be changed, that'll be pretty easy for you to look at, I think. Is that 15 minutes?
I would be willing to volunteer for a subcommittee meeting if anyone wanted.
Well, I will be happy to talk to Chairman Boxer and Vice Chairman Gutschall, and maybe we can form a small subcommittee to come back with recommendations maybe in a month or so.
Tom, how many members can we have on the subcommittee?
Well, we have, let's use...
Three's a nice number.
Yeah, three's a good number.
Plus the professionals?
Oh, yes, the professionals are available, but, and like Frank said, he might be at a stage where he could do this draft red line on the existing standards, and you would then, subcommittee could look at that, talk about that. And
I think when we talk through that, you'll come to some pretty obvious conclusions about where we should go next.
Good.
And I'm satisfied when you make changes that have to do with the bulk standards, those kinds of changes are pretty straightforward. They're generally speaking something that the board could recommend to the committee can introduce and refer back for a consistency report. Hopefully it's consistent with the master plan. You usually don't change bulk standards that are inconsistent with the master plan, and that committee can adopt it. So it's a pretty routine process. When you change the classification of a zone, say it was zoned, let's make it simple, PUD, and make it R3 or R1 or R10, that is changing the classification, and that is best done by a master plan reexamination report, maybe sometimes even a master plan land use element map change. And if you don't do it with the reexamination report, it's a little bit more elaborate with notices to people within 200 feet of that district change, that classification change.
So, and on that issue, so Frank, the Cloacus Brook development falls under planned development zone.
I thought it was a cluster, but.
Or I thought it was.
In any event, it was.
In any event, it's an old.
It's a remnant.
It's an old zone
Mhm.
that may have been for when it was built. Now you're looking at these homes that are out there on along Cloacus and off Cloacus. Don't they fit into
We could
one
come
of
up-
the existing
Jordana-
residential zones?
The Jordana Drive lots, the Lucas Brook subdivision lots, close enough to one another that you could certainly characterize them. I don't remember exactly now, but you could put standards on them that make sense.
That are in conformity
Like
with what you
regular-
have elsewhere.
Regular old residential lot standards, yeah. One of the things we should do.
Right, I mean, it's just, and anything that we can do to simplify the zoning.
Well, let me say this. I think there's a two-part job here, and I think the mayor's first comment is a really important comment that shouldn't get lost in what we're talking about here. There are some relatively simple adjustments that we can make that will make people's lives easier, just like we've talked about tonight, and those should happen, and they should probably happen pretty quickly. There are some less simple adjustments that we need to talk about this year that get more at what the mayor's talking about in terms of what's happened to our commercial corridor. We've watched the office market dry up and down. The suburban office market is really in peril. We know that AT&T has been owned by AT&T for a long time. They don't have to stay here after 2017. There's a knock in Texas that's way better than the one we have here that we thought we were indispensable for a long time. I think we have to start to have a conversation about what happens if those places change out to become something else. What is it that we think should be changing? And I mean, I can tell you from the work we're doing other places, what are the things that are most logical for it to change into? I can look at your demographics and economic circumstances and target that even better. But I guess what I'm saying is we're going to have one conversation early in the year now about this stuff. But I think we have a more important conversation that we should have over a series of meetings with the full board where we look at those zones that are going to be, we know, for instance, that the north end of Route 206, where the 4 lanes end, has been a little bit of a marginal location compared to being in the middle of the web, but you're so close to 78 and 287, how could it be a bad location, right? If it's such a good location, why is it half empty now? And why do we have sleeper buildings where somebody's still paying the rent but nobody's in the building? We need to get a better handle on what's going on there and what's going to change or not, so that we're not behind the curve. Because what I've watched happen in other towns, and it's a really sad thing, is the tax appeals start, and you watch the values cascade down phenomenally. Well, what happened when Santa Fe left? That property went from $150 million in Bridgewater to $40 million. Everybody feels that a little bit in their pocket. So that other question isn't as easy. You know, when our job was to save the farmland and protect the environment, which I think we did a great job with, everybody was cheering us except some disgruntled landowners. When our job is to rethink some of the basic premises of what we've put in place that was good for years and years, right? It was great for but it was all there when I got here. I didn't help you find all those corporate campuses. They came because of where you are. And they're leaving us now because of who we are and where they want to be. So who do we want to be when that changes? That's the conversation I think is going to be a little more challenging this year. But I think if we come at it with an open mind, we'll come with good solutions like you did in the past.
For example, the Dendrite building. It's empty.
I'm talking about.
There hasn't been a car in that parking lot since summer, maybe?
Yeah.
And in summer, it was only half occupied.
It was wing.
Every
now-
office building has a sign in front of it.
Yeah.
Just about count.
And
And every owner of an office building is going to tell you they got a great mixed-use solution for the property because offices don't pay anymore. And in a lot of cases, that's probably going to be a good answer, but it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. We need to look at our community, how our highway corridor lays out, and what's coherent, what's going to fit, what's a good fit compared to any fit. We'll do desperate things when the tax rate will start to dry up, so we just want to get ahead of that a little bit.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Or I'd like to think that we're not really ahead yet.
And this is coming from the instructions from the Township Committee, and Steve and I have met with AT&T. We've met with Somerset County. We've met with Somerset County Business Partnership as well, and we intend on being ahead of this issue before it really comes to a head. So the instructions to the planning board are to think proactively. Future's coming, and right now the commercial sector does not look positive.
I have a question for Larry, Steve, and Frank, because I think you guys are on top of this certainly more than I am. I'm a property owner, business property owner in the BA zone. I have 2 properties. My concern is that the ripple effect, downstream effect of all of these office buildings being empty will eventually devalue the properties on Main Street in the Village Neighborhood District.
There's a lot of empty properties on Main Street.
One of the things that's really interesting, and I don't know how much you got into reading, well, you heard Jeff Otto, so you heard the presentation that Advance made about what they knew to be the office market. And the thing that's so ironic is that the anemic large-scale office market over 100,000 square feet, which has almost a 30% vacancy rate in this county, contrasted with what they call, he used the word boutique, and everybody got confused what boutique means. It just means 5,000 square feet or less more, pretty much. That space is occupied at the level of 2%, 2.5% vacancy rate. So Main Street should be a great place for those kinds of offices, and then our town should have the market potential, because we have a lot of people, for instance, in Pluckerman, to be able to support the kind of office space that comes in those multiples. A lot of personal service and.
And when just as, once again, this will be anecdotal, but look at Main Street from Hillside to Far Hills. There's a fair amount of money that's being invested in some of those older, at some point they were homes, but now they're in commercials, mainly commercial, some professional space, and maybe 1 or 2 retail in there. But some folks are putting a fair amount of money into improving those structures. That corridor is a little unique. It doesn't actually blend down to Somerville Road where your building is located, but we'd like to see that. We'd like to see the houses and the buildings on Somerville Road get the same improvements that you're seeing on Main Street. But Lou, I think your concern is completely valid, that as you see those offices remain dark, the folks who frequent your business, right? It's not just the residents, it's the folks who work in town and are looking for, a great physical therapist, right? So if those businesses are dark and we're losing hundreds of employees, obviously there's a ripple effect.
They would supply, the restaurants and the cleaners and other quick check and other places.
Which got down to also part of a discussion when Larry and I met with AT&T. We were anxious to have them remain in town, but also asked them a question, and it was interesting their reaction to it. What would keep you in town? Are things that you would like to see in a commercial corridor in town that would make Bedminster a better place for AT&T?
Right.
And does that mean a better hike and bike path, because maybe their employees want to be able to come down and walk on our hike and bike path, access to that? Do you want to see more restaurants? A liquor license or 2 more, not that we have control over that necessarily. Better road access. What are the things? And the first reaction was they could have said, well, you know what? Politicians are really good at asking you before you move in. And then once you're there, they forget about you. And we're very happy that we were talking to them about it. But, that's the type of feedback we're looking for. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're trying to turn us into Greenbrook or Route 22. But also, we want to keep our residents happy, and we want to keep our commercial taxpayers happy, because we want them to pay a lot of taxes. Because when they pay a lot of taxes, we get to pay less.
So one of the things that we have to confront in this discussion, and I have to leave in a minute to go present a housing plan in Chatham Township, but part of the reason that the office, the large-scale office campus, and I think the Sanofi property that I wrote the plan in Bridgewater for, that was recently adopted, is probably as good an example as you can find, because they had the gym, they had the really nice cafeteria facility, they had everything that a single-user campus could have done right, single power plant, all that stuff's going in the trash can now, partly because just replacing the windows made it uneconomic to try to reuse the buildings, but also because they don't lend themselves, even if there was enough office user interest in them, they really don't lend themselves to being separated into the things that smaller scale multi-users would want. What we found is that when Sanofi left here to go to Cambridge and be next to, a lot of great research institutions, they made a very common choice, but they also made the choice in part because their employees want to be in a walkable environment where there are restaurants close by. Nobody wants the cafeteria anymore. The millennials, as we keep hearing them talked about, we almost like they're monolithic. Millennials are between 18 and 34 years old right now. So they're obviously everything from still in high school to having kids and looking for a single family home. But the housing problem that has made so much of the Central Jersey office market complicated, the fact that rental housing, think of all the multifamily units we have in Bedminster, right? Way more than we have single family units. Do you know how many rental units you can go to a rental office and sign an application for so you can go get an apartment in Bedminster out of the thousands of multifamily units we have? Less than 200. We don't have a fluid market. We don't have a market where you can rent an apartment, an upscale apartment, everything, so all the millennials want to live in Hoboken, in Jersey City, or over in Brooklyn. Truth of the matter is there isn't enough of those places to go around, and most of the jobs aren't all there. There are jobs all over the place that people are trying to be in, but they're also looking for these little walkable towns and communities. And you've got beautiful, you've got two villages that are really stunning. And the unfortunate part is one of them was overwhelmed by the people that were dumped on it, and the other one, the people are all gone now. The main street, when you drive down at night, it's dark, right? Nobody lives there anymore. It's just sad that we've watched such an evolution. So the question is, what kind of place do we want to be as we continue to change? What are we going to add that might bring more life back to a place that had more life before? Where could it be added in a tasteful way as opposed to what would be out of place? If anybody tells you got to change the character of your community radically, they're full of crap, and you know it, and I know it. But if anybody tells you everything's perfect here and you don't need to change a thing, I think they're wrong too. And I think that that's going to be hard, because you're going to hear people saying to me, well, wait a minute, you told us we should have much lower density, and now you're telling me I should have higher density? Make up your mind, will you? I find myself thinking that, and nobody ever says that to me, but I think it all the time. And I'm saying what I'm saying now, because right now people need to hear that that's left, sort of aside for so long, that communities that can have a completely fully balanced housing supply, variety and choice of housing for what you've got as much variety and choice as most towns wish they could have. And yet, if I wanted to rent an apartment tomorrow, I guess I'm old enough for Pluckerman Park, so I could probably, but now that I think of it. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, a fluid market where desirable rental units are available is something that a town that wants to maintain their corporate tendencies to make sure is either very close or in your town. So that's a conversation that I'm just throwing the bomb in the room tonight. We'll talk about that.
But yet those office buildings were full for years without any apartments, right?
But again, the baby boomers, in the course of our move through the system, the reason all that happened, we and the people that came before us, and the people coming behind us are now a bigger traffic than the baby boomers are. So the millennials I just mentioned, there's actually more of them now than there are of us. And as they move through, they're going to do more of, remember how all the schools had to get blown out when the baby boomers came through because we just kept making more and more babies? Well, they're not making so many babies yet, and they're not driving so many cars, but they're going to age. And they continue to age. At some point, they're going to come and buy houses out here. They won't be in other more walkable places forever. Families do that. But I think if we want to be a place that's really capturing the opportunity to be the greatest place to live and work and play, then there are some missing pieces in our housing supply, I think.
To address George's comment, a number. It's not just the residential factors. It's corporate offices where they're heading, and a lot of it is tech-driven. So, for example, when we were meeting with the folks from AT&T, one of the executives turned to us and said, and this is this very senior executive, he said, "I don't have an office. Come in, I get my laptop, and I go find a station." That idea of an executive walking into a large corner office or something else is really no longer the model for the way the corporate office buildings are set up, whether it's architecturally or whether it's just, from a programmatic HR perspective. It's a little bit different. So they don't need, one of the numbers, and Frank, maybe you know this number better than I do, that you had, I'm throwing out numbers, think of them as relative. You might have had 275 square feet per employee. The number is now more like 125 or 100 square feet per employee. They don't need the big buildings. They don't need the big atriums. You're just not seeing that in a lot of the new office buildings that are being set up.
And everything about technology is going to make hard floor, bricks and mortar will be less and less important over time. The thing we haven't seen, this thing that's happening in the office market, we've certainly seen regional malls that are now being reinvented, but there's going to be an incredible recognition that there's too much retail floor area. We've been building retail wherever it was zoned for commercial, but if you could get tenants, it was a deal, right?
But I do want to follow up on the tech issue, because that is something that we did hear from AT&T, and we've heard from others as well, is that having employees who are on the cutting edge of technology is helpful, and having the opportunities for their employees to advance that technology education is also helpful. So AT&T, and maybe not so much here in Bedminster, but down in Texas, where they're now headquartered, or really, I guess, officially headquartered, really promoting and incentivizing their employees to take classes on coding and other technology elements that they feel that's where the future of AT&T is going to go. And probably for some of the other Bedminster businesses, corporate businesses. So to the extent that there's any land use perspective, and this is not just for Bedminster, but for Somerset County as well, whether it's the community college or other programs that might be out there, that will also, to some degree, help those companies stay here, because we're going to give their employees, or they will have that opportunity to learn more about technology and to become technology proficient. So there are a lot of moving pieces, but those buildings were occupied for years, and they're not so much right now. It's a number of factors.
Absolutely.
More and more people are working remotely with technology too.
I think AT&T, there's like either 25 or 30% of their workforce doesn't come in every day.
Yeah. Wow.
They might come in 3 days out of the week, and they go to a different workstation.
They go to a different workstation. They get their laptop, and they might sit here one day, and they might sit in the room over there the next day.
And like you said, Larry, the number went from 250 or 300 to less than 100. So A lot of people don't have an office anymore. All right, I think,
I was about to say something about half hour ago.
No, Frank hit it. I was just going to say that the conversation started with the commercial aspect of this really being the big dent and the residents feeling the effect of that. And the subcommittee we're talking about, I just want to make sure that we're talking about both the residential and the commercial side, and what are we going to address?
yes,
So, but you
yeah,
hit it, so-
definitely.
Sounds like we have two members in the committee. Isn't he volunteering someone else?
So nice of him.
I'd like to say one other thing before I have to run out the door. I get a lot more credit than I deserve. This place was really great when I got here. Every time somebody stands there and talks about me being the reason this is a great place, I get a chuckle. But I can tell you that this guy in the green sweater, he is one of the reasons that I did some really good work here, and he's one of the reasons this is a great place. So I was embarrassed when Michelle was saying all that stuff, and I figured, he likes me now, he's much nicer to me. Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank.
Mayor Metelsky, do you like Frank?
Please don't. We're doing so good. Respect for Frank.
That was a lawyerly answer, wasn't it?
We've got a lot of lawyers in this room.
Would any members of the audience like to make any comments?
I'd like to make comments.
Come on up, Mr.
I'd
Metelsky.
like to get Mayor Metelsky's
Comment.
opinion about some of these topics.
I think, Frank and Tom both provided some guidance about going at it in a very organized way, looking at it in total as opposed to piecemeal. I'm surprised, although based upon a comment that Frank made about we don't want to go big bang and cost a lot of money, but we're in a position where the master plan should be revised. It really should. It's 13 years old. And that's a document on which we rely for all of the land use board deliberations. And to pack it in piecemeal, I'm not arguing about doing that to the extent there are some things that should be attended to. Go ahead and attend to them. But somewhere along the line, I think you need to really step up to the task of revising the master plan and bring the community, the total community, into that process as we've done in the past, as Frank knows, so that what comes out of it is what, quote, the community wants, as opposed to what its elected officials or appointed officials think they want. Now, maybe you also know what they want, and that's good. You should be in touch with them. But it's nice to give them the forum and the opportunity to express what they think the community totally ought to look like. And that requires a revision of the master plan. It's an old document. And so maybe there's a lot of reasons to make some changes to adapt to the future as you see the future. That's my only point.
Thanks, Mr. Metelsky.
Thank you.
Mayor. Once a mayor, always.
Okay, well, let's move on. This is a great beginning. This is a very important discussion, obviously, for the town. I think I'll let Lance and Carol talk about a subcommittee next time. And as Frank said, he'll put together...
Appoint a subcommittee by himself without having a board.
Yeah, they can, the mayor will do that and all that stuff. So, moving on. Board member comments from the planning board. Any comments?
Yes, not about what we've talked about, but we do have some applications coming up, and I know that some of the applications that are coming up are going to require some significant number of folks on this dais to recuse themselves, including me. I would please ask that everybody look at your schedules, and please make sure you can avail yourself of the first 2 Thursdays of the month, even when on those occasions that you are on duty for, because we're going to have in the very near future significant absences that if we have an extra absence outside of the recusals, we may not get a quorum. And that's, one, going to drag an application out. It's also going to cost the applicant money. It's going to cost us a lot of time, and it's going to skunk other applicants that could have used that night. We've already seen a little bit of that. I know we're all volunteers here. We all have a lot of other things going on in our lives, and I appreciate everything that do, but please, please, if you know you're not going to make it, give us as much heads up as possible so the chair can make the schedule go. That's all I have.
Anybody else?
No comments.
No, sir.
Okay.
Good job, George.
Do we need to schedule anything, Trina? We're all good? Okay, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All right.